Perfect. And it looks like we are live. So we're going to give it a couple of moments just for everybody to join us. How are you doing, Afrosa?
Good, good. It's strange times.
Strange times, yes,
Yeah.
yes. What have you been doing? What have you been up to this week?
So this week, a lot of webinars. It's like the done thing. Every day there's a webinar. So I think it's quite challenging to find that balance between Zooming and just chilling. So a lot of screen time, unfortunately.
Yeah. And have you been doing some as a medical professional as well?
Yeah, so we're seeing patients online. We do phone calls, so I work on the 111. So anyone who's called that, you might have heard me on there. Tuition, as in medical school tuition, everything's online. We just did a whole set of medical school interviews. That was all online. So
Everything
yeah,
is online.
and then you have a go at the kids for being online when.
Brilliant. I can see that we've got a lot of people who are joining us.
They're just listening to our banter, aren't they?
Yeah, 26 people. I'm going to give it just a minute more just to allow anyone who is last minute trying to catch us to turn up, and then we'll begin with our talk. So that will be good. Real. All right, there we are. Perfect. And just for those people who are listening, if you can just drop us a message down in the comments, let us know that you're here. Let us know that you are listening to us. We can see all the comments, or I can see all the comments that come up. So if you ask questions throughout the presentation, if you've got anything that's burning, we'll probably wait till the end, unless it's something that's really relevant. And then I'll bring it in. But I can see all your comments, so do feel free to say hi. And if you're watching this on replay as well, again, do pop in and say hi. I know that all of the admins will be looking through the chat, they'll be looking through the comments, and they will be helping out beyond just this hour that we're doing here live. So it's great to see people are messaging, people can see us, and perfect. We've got about 60 people watching at the moment, which is great. All right, Brill. All right then, I think we can probably begin. Okay. So it's great to be here, and it's great to be present, and to be invited by Deep to run our first live here in the group, and it's particularly nice for me because I get to do it with Afrosa, and actually that makes it a lot easier for me and a lot more fun. So I'm going to let you introduce yourself and tell everyone about you.
Right, so I'm a medical school, actually a GP and a medical school tutor. I'm a GP for about 15 years, so my background is actually in medicine. But through that time, I've also have 3 children who I've put through the 11 plus, and I'm still standing just about. I also, in my day job, as I said, a GP, I've done some books, written some books, particularly on interviews. So that's my speciality, which is what I'll be talking to you about today. And in my spare time, I'm a mindfulness coach and a mum of 3 boys. I think that's everything.
Brilliant. And a whole wealth of experience in bringing your boys up through, or bringing your children up through the 11 plus. So I come at it from the opposite end. I am a private tutor. I'm a qualified teacher, and I've been tutoring for about 9 years. I myself sat the 11 plus for Chelmsford Girls Grammar. And from there, I went on to Oxford, where I did my degrees. I'm a residential tutor, and so that means that I work with families all around the world and helping them to attend top UK universities and schools, whether that is a grammar school or whether that is an independent school. And I also run the Education Hotel, which is a tuition advice mentoring agency. So we've been called today, and we've offered to do this to discuss the differences between private or independent, and grammar schools. Both of them have entrance exams. Both of them are competitive in some way. And there's always a lot of talk about what makes a good school. In fact, a lot of parents come to me, they ask me, can you tell me what the good school in this area is, or the best school in this area? And I will always say to them, I cannot, because to what makes a good school to one family is not necessarily what makes a good school to another family. So I've put down a couple of different things to look for, but obviously it depends on your child, and your child may, for example, put a large amount of emphasis on the arts and music, and maybe not so much on sports. And so applying for a very, very sporty school is not going to be one that fits them. You might put your emphasis on academics, and maybe location isn't so important to you. But there is a number of things to consider when you are considering what makes a good school. But ultimately, it's got to be one that your child wants to go to, and it's got to be one that you as a family are happy to go to. I think I'm quite keen to press that for me, obviously people come to me and they're looking to go to a specific school, or they want us to find a specific school to them, but it's about what fits that child. It's not about the top league tabled schools. It's not necessarily about which one sends the most to Oxbridge. It's about what fits that child. So really, what makes a good school, you decide, and your child decides. And I know, Afrosa, you've put your children through school, and which ones of those were the ones that you were looking at when you were deciding?
Yeah, actually, that's an interesting question because I think the thing for me was that each child was different. So I didn't have this thing that every child should go to the same school. We treated each child individually, and they each had different strengths and abilities. So my eldest one was quite academic, so I knew, right, whatever environment he would be in, he'll be fine. My second one is extremely sporty, so for him to be happy, I needed a sporty environment. And the third one, you just forget about the third one, really, don't you? He just exists. Mum of three, hashtag.
And I suppose for you, did location come into it? Was that something?
Yeah, I
Three
think so,
kids,
definitely.
got to be.
Yeah. Location definitely did come into it because I think as a family, we like to go to their events. So my husband's quite sporty. He likes to go to watch their matches. So we do a lot of to and fro in. I think to be part of community and school life, location was very important. We didn't want to go somewhere too far. And also friendships. We wanted to know the families. So having friends who were local, that really helped. We got to know the parents. We popped in and out of school. So location is definitely a big one on our list.
Yeah. And I know that some people probably just been through it, where they've got the school list, and maybe they've been assigned a school that is maybe not their top choice, or they have a grammar and they have an independent, and they're trying to work out where to go. Location is often something that I believe sometimes is overlooked. Really do consider how long your child might be sat on a bus or a train or a coach, because they're going to be doing that every single day of their school life. Then that's definitely something to consider.
And I would just say your list is different to someone else's list. What's good for me and my family might not be what's good for someone else. So don't feel bad or don't, compare. And I think each to their own with their decision.
Yeah. And we've actually had a question, which is, many children don't necessarily have a specific preference or a specific interest, an overriding one that comes at the top of their list. And how would we suggest that parents choose the right school? And for me, that is done on more than a specific preference. So there might be a location factor, there might be a cost factor in there, there might be a community factor. You mentioned being part of the community is often important, and ensuring that you have friends nearby, but also thinking about a child who maybe doesn't have those interests. Is it a school that's going to nurture new interests? So is it a school that provides lots of extracurricular or supracurricular activities, and an extracurricular is one like sports, or one like kayaking, or I get some rock climbing or painting or flower arranging, whatever that is. A supracurricular is one that's a bit more academic. So do they do a debate club, or do they do external speakers who come in? So are they a nurturing school? Again, pastoral side, I suppose, comes into it. And I get, again, parents who are very, very keen that their child is really supported. And that could be because they have additional needs, but that also could be just because their child's a little bit less confident at the moment, and they want to make sure that they are really well looked after, and that their confidence grows within a school. So for me, it's all individual, which is why I meet with each family and I discuss the child and I'll talk to the child, because ultimately it's about getting the right fit. Right. The biggest thing, and this is what the next one is that it's your child, and therefore it is your choice. And if you want to go to grammar and you want to go for 11 plus, great. If you've decided that the 11 plus at the end of this is not the right choice for you, also brilliant. If you want to apply to a well-known independent school, go for it. If you want to apply to a small one that no one's heard of, perfect. And if you want to change school, some children will change school at 13 as opposed to 11, also fine. So just be aware that it's yours. It's your choice to make. And I know that online and at the school gates, there is a lot of opinion as to what you should do and what you shouldn't do, and what's right and what isn't right. But it's got to be right for your family. So it's got to be the right. And I can actually see someone here has written visiting those prospective schools is often a really great way. And obviously at the moment it's really hard because COVID has meant that those visits are restricted. But if you are looking for a September entrance, then visiting the schools, talking to current parents and current students, and really reaching out on forums such as this to see, are there parents who have children at this school, and what would they have to say about it? What's their best things? What things do they think could be improved? But also don't forget that a school will change. A school will change as you go through it, because it's 7 years. So I know when I talk to parents about schools, and they say to me, well, I want to make the best choice in terms of university prospects for my child. I will take that with a pinch of salt, because you're looking 7 years in the future and no one can tell what's going to happen at that point. So I wouldn't make a decision purely based on GCSE results, league tables, or Oxbridge or university, or the amount of people that they get into veterinary or dentistry, because your child might not be wanting to do that when they come in 7 years' time, but also the school might have changed. So it's more about the fit. We talk a lot in tutors about fit, but about how your child fits in with the school at the moment. That would be my biggest thing. And often you can get a really great feel of that by walking around the school and by talking to current pupils and current parents as well. All right. Okay.
So just to pick up on that last comment about not knowing your child, that's absolutely fine. That's what secondary school is there for, is to discover what you like, discover what you don't like. It's okay not to know.
Okay. I think we can't really get round the difference between private and grammar without discussing the cost, because that's a big input for independent schools. And I've picked two schools, and these are purely picked because I've got students at both. So we're looking at around 12,000 per year for Manchester Grammar, and it's a day school, all the way up to around 40 per year in boarding, and that's Cheltenham Ladies. And these are really quite wide ranging differences, but cost is obviously something that comes into it if you're looking at an independent school. And so if you are making that decision, obviously there is that decision to make. Some of my parents prefer to go to they'll have the offers on the table with a grammar and an independent, and they will eventually make the independent choice. and they will choose to do that because they would rather have that money to do something like university, to be able to fund their child for a university. Or they might have siblings and they might say, well, strategically, we think that we want to be able to have this option when our second child comes through. And if we go for this school now, we might not have that choice. So cost is definitely something to consider. And we've put down here scholarships and bursaries, and that there's a big difference, and it's something that gets talked about a lot online, in that a scholarship often will not have a fee reduction with it. So it's a prestige. It's something that you might get special privileges for at school. You might get special dinners. You might get a certain kind of treatment, or something that's a little bit unusual, a bit different. Whereas a bursary is on a sliding scale, and it's based on income. They have been reduced over the last few years, especially this year. COVID has had a big impact. And often schools will give a sliding scale of bursary. And what has happened a lot in families that I have seen recently is that they go into this process assuming they'll get the highest percentage possible. And it's not, it's a sliding scale. So do be aware. There are some scholarships which come with a bursary attached. So there is that type of arrangement, but it is a little bit rarer. And so for scholarships, you can end up with a music scholarship, you can get an arts scholarship, you can get a drama scholarship, you can often get something called an all-rounder scholarship, and you can get an academic scholarship for independent schools. And this is an independent only real thing. And each one of those has something slightly different attached to it. And each school is slightly different in the way that they present it. So some of them might attach a bursary to it. Some of them might attach a one-off fee, a one-off reward to it. It really depends on the school. My personal advice, and this is something very, very specific to me, but I wouldn't apply to a school if you need a big bursary to afford the fees. And that is because of the frustration that you would get and the waste of time if you were not to get the top bursary. And bursaries can be really wide ranging, and really depends on the school. But if you are banking on having that highest level of bursary, I would really consider why you're applying for that school, because if you need that biggest amount of bursary, the likelihood is you won't get it. So just, I would really be aware. And I know there's been a couple of questions in here. What do we define as a big bursary? Can we get cases of students who have been accepted with full paid bursaries? Yes, I have some students who are on full bursaries. I have many students who are on 5%, and I have many students who are on nothing. I have many students who are scholars, but they get no fee decrease. Those who end up with a whole 100%, it's rare. It's rare. It's really dependent on the school, and it's really, it differs dependent on the school. I don't know if you have anything else to add, Afrosa, on that.
No, there's a couple of questions. Can I throw them at you, Gemma?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so someone said, how about grammar schools doing IBs, international? Is there any benefit of that? How many schools should you apply for? I think you answered the one about paid bursary. And the third one is, should you have a tutor for one subject or the same tutor for all subjects?
Okay.
Should I do that one?
At me a bit slower so that I can answer each one.
Let's do one at a time, sorry. How many schools do you suggest applying for?
Really dependent on the family. So if you are saying, I don't want to go to the local state, we are under no circumstances going to that local state, we are applying for independent and we are applying for grammar, then I would apply for multiple independents and I would apply for the grammars. So that would be where I'd put a big spread on it. If I was to say my child will be happy at a state, and I would be happy for them to go to that state and actually what we're doing is we're going to apply for the grammar, but if they don't get it, they don't get it. Then that would be restriction. So that is very child dependent for me.
Yeah. But I think I would add not to spread your child too thin, because a lot of these exams have different types of exams. A lot of these schools, someone might do reasoning, someone might do creative writing. So you're having to learn all the different formats if you apply to lots of schools. So this is just my own experience. It's not scientific or research based in any shape or form. I would say for the privates, 4 or 5 is probably adequate number. Okay, the second question was about should you have one tutor for one subject or a tutor that teaches all the different aspects?
I separate them purely in my tuition agency. The reason for that is these are competitive exams. I wouldn't want somebody who is an English specialist teaching math, and therefore I don't expect my parents to want that either. So again, personal decision. I know that there are many tutors out there that do all of them, and that's something that's their choice. But a personal thing for me is just I want to the students who come to me are looking for very selective exams, very selective schools, and therefore we do it separately.
Good, great, and please keep coming with your questions. Gemma's a breadth of knowledge, so use us. No question is too silly. If we miss a question, just put it again on the chat. We'll try and pick it up. Yeah. I'll answer this other question about unis preferring state school children and grammar schools, particularly medicine. So that's my remit. I would say no, that there is no preference. Okay. At the end of the day, when you're applying to university, it's your grades and your UCAT score, especially medicine. I think it's a myth that some universities prefer state school children. However, there's always a however. If you're from a disadvantaged background, there is a separate program like the Winding Participation Program that is available to you. So if you're a single parent or you're on free school meals, for example, there are other ways you can get into university. And in that situation, yes, coming from that background will help you. But for example, I sit on the UCL panel. We do not know what school you've come from. Okay, so generally I would say don't let that be a big part of your decision.
Also, I think that's it for now. It's 7 years' time. So 7 years' time, bit different. Yeah. I can see that there's a couple of terminology parts. So when I would say independent school, that is the same as a private. And a grammar school is a state-funded selective school. That said, there are some independent schools, such as Manchester Grammar, which is a fee-paying school. It is not a state grammar school. So they are really kind of terminology different. What I would say always is go to the school directly. As much as our experts on here are wonderful and we are up to date, things change very quickly. So do always go to the school and do always ask the school specifically. All right, just trying to push ahead. Here we are. Yes, so this is also, I think, probably quite useful. So there are many different terminologies that we start to see. 11 plus. 11 plus can be both a grammar and an independent school exam. They are structured differently, as Afrosa is going to talk about it a little bit. But usually they'll be English and math, but they could include verbal and non-verbal. GL, CSSE, and CEM, they are 3 boards of the grammar exam. So if somebody says they're taking the GL exam, they mean that they are taking a grammar exam, so to go to a state grammar school, but it is that their school, the school that they're looking for, is within the area that uses GL. And within that, some schools will use GL and will use their English and math, and some schools will do English, math, verbal, and non-verbal from GL. So it really depends on the different areas. Different areas also change what they do from time to time. So again, I would really emphasize, if you have a school in mind, get hold of that school, because they will tell you exactly what they are doing. I know there's been, I think it's Kendrick that's changing some of theirs very recently. So they put out like an email to say we're thinking of changing, and it probably means that they're going to change from GL to, I think it's CEM. But but the schools change quite regularly, so do check. 11 plus independent often can be set by the school. 13 plus. So 13 plus is a completely different age group. They apply for year 9 entrance. It's also sometimes called common entrance. It is much more involved in terms of the exams. So you will do a English, a math, a science. Well, often the science is a biology, chemistry, and physics separate. Then you can do a history, geography, and RS. You can do a modern foreign language. That could be Mandarin, Spanish, German, French, and sometimes you can do an ancient language, which would be a Latin or a Greek. Most students who are applying for the 13 plus are doing so from a prep school, and that is the point of a prep school. They will prepare those students for the common entrance. So they will go through the syllabus. They'll be going through that syllabus from quite an early point. It's about year 5 they start, which means that by the time they take their common entrance exam, they are then set up in terms of, there we are, it's Reading. Thanks, Sheena. They're then set up in terms of what they need to do. So 11 plus and 13 plus for independent use a board called ISEB. So sometimes you hear ISEB used as opposed to 11 plus, 13 plus, common entrance, lots of wording. Pretest. Pretest is used for 13 plus entrance and 11 plus entrance. So for example, Wickham Abbey has a pretest. Wickham Abbey will do their pretest in October. They'll do their actual test in January. It is used to pre-select. So if you are applying to that school, you will take the pretest, and that is like the first round of a test. And then you might, if you get through, you'll go to take the actual ones. And again, pretest can be run by ISEB, which is the board that sets the 11 plus and 13 plus for independence. Occasionally, it can be designed for a school itself. So again, really school specific. UK ISET. A lot of terminology, I'm afraid. But UK ISET is if you are an abroad student, so you're coming from overseas, it tests both English language, but it also tests aptitude. So it's looking at some non-verbal reasoning. It's looking at essentially the way that a child works. And that is done before anything else in the first stage for a student from overseas. So there are a load of different tests. 11 plus, 13 plus is the one that I think 11 plus is most commonly used because that's the point that most students are moving from primary school to secondary school. But there are lots of others. There's also something called an out of year entrance, and sometimes you hear of it called a 12 plus exam. Sometimes people talk about it when students unfortunately don't get the grades they need for 11 plus. It's a bit of a word of warning. These are really quite specific because they're out of year. It could be for a grammar, it can be for an independent, but there are much smaller places. You're talking 2 or 3, if that. So if you hear of a student who is going for a 12 plus exam, they will be going for it often based on being invited by the school or having expressed their interest from the school, but they will be competing for very, very small numbers of places. So those small number of places means that it's a bit of an unusual exam, and that's why we'd say it's an out of entrance. It's not a standard year. All right. I've got through all of the terminology. There is a lot of it. All right. Perfect. And I'm going to hand you over now.
So I've just been keeping an eye on the chat and trying to answer as much as I can. Okay, so should we get up our slides?
So can you see your slides?
Yep. Okay, so we're talking about the written paper. So what I thought I'd do now is just take quickly through the format of the independent school exam. And whatever we say, I'm just going to say a general piece of advice. Whatever Gemma and I say, whatever you see on Facebook, if you've asked someone on social media, always double check with the school, okay? Advice changes very quickly. The format changes very quickly, especially in these COVID times. So do check for yourself. on the actual school website to make sure everything is up to date and there's been no changes. So you can do 11 plus and 13 plus. It's quite different to the grammar school exam. Often it's taken later, so typically January or December time. COVID is very different. Some of the schools move their exams earlier, but I'm going to talk about the non-COVID times because this was a very unique year. So typically January, December time. Like I said, check on the website. Now, I think one of the common mistakes parents make, and maybe it's not a mistake, but this is something I wouldn't advise to do. I think the independent school and the grammar school are two parallel preparations. And what parents do is they do the grammar school prep, they get the results, and then they start the independent school prep. And while this is not wrong, it's difficult. You're setting yourself up for something that's very difficult. And that's why I say, really try and focus that the two are separate and parallel. Sometimes your prep, they will cross at intersections, such as the maths. It might be very similar for both sets of preparation. However, things like creative writing, none of that is in some of the grammar schools, but it's only in independent schools. So if you leave it late, you are making it difficult for your child. And it's quite tricky to suddenly write an essay with really good standard in the 2 months that you've got left till the exam. The earlier you apply, this is specifically to independent schools, the better. For example, I applied, I think, when my children were in year 4, because we definitely knew we were going down the independent route. And this year, because we applied early, we actually got an email from HABS, and they said they're changing the format of the exam. So they contacted everyone who applied early, and this information was not on their website. So they told us before anybody else that they were moving the date and they were moving the format. And the website was updated a lot later. There are lots of perks. Remember, if I'm a school and I see someone apply early, I know that they're motivated. I know that they're keen. So it's like you're going for a job offer. It shows that you're keen. It shows your passion and enthusiasm. Just remember, when independent schools get their application forms, it's very obvious when you've applied and you've just got your grammar school placement and suddenly you've applied to an independent school. And what impression is that given is that, okay, they probably didn't get their place and suddenly they've made a late application to an independent school. Like I said, this is not wrong. Your child's not going to be denied a place, but just general advice is if you are definitely going down the independent route, then apply early. All right, shall we have the next slide? Okay, so let's take each component of the independent school exam. So maths, actually there's a lot of overlay between the grammar school prep and the independent school papers. However, especially the last questions on maths paper, you'll notice they go beyond the year 6 syllabus. So they're quite challenging, and these are the ones they differentiate for the scholarship candidates. And what I say to parents and kids is don't worry, don't start crying if you can't do those last questions. They're supposed to be difficult. Even if you get part of them, that's great, okay? So know that they're going to be challenging. Unlike the grammar school papers, in the maths paper, the working out matters. You're going to get points. And I always say to kids, just kind of remember that these teachers don't know anything. They don't know what's going on in your brain. You have to put down on paper exactly what you're thinking. How did you get to that point? How did you get to that answer? Put it in the working out. And one of the things you're going to train your child is to notice how many marks. So if there's a question that's 3 marks, you know there's some working out that's got to be done. If it's 1 mark, just do something very simple, move on very quickly. So do look at the number of marks the question is allocated. Past papers are a key to preparation, whatever it is, if it's English or maths with the independent schools. They're very similar. So, you know, very common maths questions will come up time and time again. Typical one will be 2 apples plus 3 bananas is £5. How many do 2 apples and 7 bananas cost? You know, you spot these questions. So definitely do past papers. And remember, the school are writing these. Majority of cases, the school are writing their own papers. So they do have a certain set of questions that they want to cover. They're not multiple choice, very few. I can't think of any. I don't know if Jemma can think of any. Most of them are standard format, which means you're writing them all out. Okay, you're not doing multiple choice where you're just crossing a box. They're standard format. You need to write the answer out. And again, just in an English paper is just spelling and grammar. Write those numbers out. You know, look at, if you're not sure of the spelling, look at the question. It might be in there how to spell something like percentage. You know, you can't quite remember how many E's there are. There are all these little hacks that you can do. And that's the next slide.
Yeah. It's also worth mentioning, I suppose, with the math, with them writing their own it means that you often end up, and some of my students get kind of distracted by this. They'll use people's names, or they'll use the year that it's in, or they'll use the school, and that's not something they're used to seeing from a grammar school prep, because that's not the way it's designed. They'll go, oh, all this school's in it, and that's all designed to make it more interesting, but it's also sometimes a bit distracting. So you have to. That's why I'd echo your point of preparing alongside, because it's very hard as a tutor to switch somebody from a grammar to an independent so quickly. If you're used to those two different styles of exam, it's much easier for a student to be able to work through.
Actually, that reminds me, my son saw his name in a maths question. He just couldn't get over it. We just had to pack up. He was so excited.
Exactly.
Right. Okay, English. So the English paper, again, you might be different from the grammar school prep. This is why we're just echoing that point. Don't leave the prep for the independent schools till after you get your grammar results. It's too much to do in too short a time. Some people do it, but it's going to be difficult. Standard format, again, not your multiple choice where you're just ticking the boxes. Spelling, punctuation matter. Grammar matters. Handwriting matters. Okay, so these are skills that you should be developing from year 4 onwards, just the basic. These are your foundation to answer the independent school papers. With the questions, we notice some big questions in the English paper. So sometimes 8 marks, 15-mark questions in merchant tailors. And they're really focusing on what the author means. How does the author use language? You might have heard of PEE, which is a technique that a lot of people use to answer these questions. So they're very different to the grammar school questions. Some of the papers will have creative writing and an essay component, again, not in the grammar school. And unlike the grammar school, it's good old-fashioned marking. Teachers are sitting there and they have to hand mark these. These are not computer marked. So very different preparation.
I know from the comments, there's been a couple of questions just about how early you can apply. Again, it's really school dependent, and I would always go straight to the school. If you know that your child wants to go to that school, or that you are interested in them, go directly to the school. There's also some questions on past papers for the independents. A lot of them are on their websites. Some of the scholarships aren't. So, for example, Cheltenham Ladies Scholarship often is not on their website, or some of the Eton is, there's usually restricted numbers, but to get a feel for the independent schools, you can take them from lots of different independent schools. So I actually have some straight open on my dashboard, because I'm about to do an assessment with somebody. I've got Bancroft's up, I've got St Edward's up, I have some Wickham Abbey up, I have some Kings up. So there are lots that are all on the different schools' websites. So do feel free to go to those and to ask. The other things that we've got is CSSE format similar to independence? No, it is different. I would say they are two very separate exams. CSSE is a grammar style, same as GL and CEM. They all have differences within them, and they have differences and similarities, but again, I would count the independence as a separate path to the grammars. And somebody is asking, how early can you apply for a bursary or a scholarship? Usually it's done on your application form. So if you are wanting a scholarship entrance, you might end up taking different papers as well. So the scholarship papers are sometimes done after the standard entrance papers, sometimes done instead of the standard entrance papers, but that is something dependent on the school. So again, do contact the school.
I can see there's some ladies helping us on the chat. We really appreciate it. So thank you, whoever's put in their input. That's really appreciated. Okay, so creative writing, that can come in various forms. Again, look at the website, look at the school that you're applying to. For example, City Boys, they always do continue the story. That's it, there's no other options. So go through the past papers, find out the format. Sorry, I know more the boys' schools because I've got 3 boys. So HABs, MTs, typically they would give a picture. In HABs, they'll say write 3 paragraphs. So it's worth doing your research. Other ones are give a descriptive piece from a title. So we had one where describe a sweet shop. It might be an article. These are kind of a little not as well known. Letters, formal or informal, write to a friend, write a letter to your MP. So the take-home message is, really look at the past papers. But if you can see what the problem is if you leave that prep for the independent school too late, you're trying to cover a lot of bases.
It's worth saying with the scholarships, Wickham Abbey scholarship a couple of years ago had no creative writing. It only had articles, letters, and I think there was an instructional manual. So that was a bit of an odd one because everyone was expecting something that was creative, that was maybe picture based, and they didn't put any in. So sometimes they can throw you, and whereas you're expecting that story writing, it might not be it.
Was that a COVID thing, Gemma, that they just changed it, or was that?
No, it was a couple of years ago. So it was just they'd had some very, very good writers beforehand, and they didn't want stories, basically. They wanted to test students beyond that for scholarship.
Yeah. I know Habs this year, they got rid of the whole creative writing thing completely. So, prepare for the unexpected. Okay, reasoning. Some schools do them, some schools don't. Merchant tailors don't have a reasoning paper anymore. There can be different formats. With the reasoning, they're not usually written by the school, so they will take from a board such as GL or CEM. And again, we talked about vocabulary and terminology. If you see that the school does CMVR, that's usually English VR. So just take that home. Usually they're MCQ, so they will get a computer to mark those. And I don't think you need to go overboard with the reasoning practice in independent school. If you've got English, maths and reasoning, then, do some prep. But I think the English and maths, I don't know if Gemma, if you have different advice, I think those are the more heavily weighted ones.
I would say if you've never seen reasoning before, spend some time on it. So if you're doing grammar and you're not doing the reasoning part of it, but you are doing independent, that would be the point I'd spend that time. Otherwise, it's an easier one to get fairly high in because it's multiple choice and because it has rules and because it is a methodical answer, but it is still something that's tested. So.
And there isn't any negative marking in these, so I can't think of any school that does negative marking. So, definitely answer them. Right, we talked a little bit more about vocab. So really look, when you go to the school website, look for the terms. What is the reasoning exam about? And I've just kind of deciphered some. So if they say reasoning test, you can generally infer it's VR, non-VR, and mathematical reasoning. If the website says they're going to test quantitative reasoning, then it's problem solving maths-based. And abstract reasoning usually means NVR. So look at the fine print of all these.
Also, and this isn't really a UK specific thing, but sometimes some schools will use something called a CAT 4, which is a different style of test, but it does involve some of those reasoning aspects. So you do sometimes see those parts. Somebody has asked, I think this might be interesting, why should you apply for a scholarship in an independent school? Like, what's the point of it? I know, I suppose I'd be interested to know your thoughts on that one.
Yeah. So I think this links in with parental expectation. Okay, so a scholarship is more the accolade and the prestige. I think if you go thinking the scholarship is going to be financial, you're going to be disappointed. That is very rare, and it's becoming increasingly less so. So don't feel the need that your child needs to go for a scholarship. I don't think that should be the standard expectation. If they get it, great. Again, scholarships vary school to school. In some, it's just a title. Nothing special happens when you're a scholar. In my son's school, if you're a scholar, you are taught, some classes are taught separately, and they try to stretch those students. And again, people who are in the scholars program are more likely to go to Oxford and Cambridge. But if you're not a scholar, that doesn't mean you can't go to those universities. So they get perks, they get accolades, they get a bit of prestige. It's not for everyone. It means a commitment. If you're a sports scholar, for example, you have to go to training. That's my middle son. He has to be there at 7:30. He has to represent the school at matches, rain, shine, hail or snow. So, music scholarship, you need to be involved in the concerts. So you have to work for these things. thinking far ahead, something to put down on your CV, your personal statement, something for university. So I'd say they're perks, but it's not the be all and end all if you don't have a scholarship.
I actually have a student who, she's an overseas student. We applied 13 plus entrance and standard entrance because of the timing more than anything. So we didn't want to have to sit through another round of exams before we found out a decision. And now she's going for 16 plus scholarship because she wants it. No other reason, just because she is that type of child that wants that recognition, and she's good at academics, and she feels like she should have gone for it for 13 plus, so she's going to go for it for 16 plus. But there's no real reason other than she wants to do it.
Yeah, I mean, mental well-being and health is my big forte as well. If your child is going to handle rejection very badly, again, think about whether you're going to apply for a scholarship.
Actually, we do have a question on mental health support in independent versus grammar. I would say it's very individualistic to the school. I work with a number of independent schools who are really, really hot on mental health, and I work with a lot of girls' schools, and they're very aware of the mental health, kind of how aware you have to be with teens, and especially with teenage girls. And there are ones that are known for being very pressurizing. Often it's the girls that will put that on themselves. So yeah, but different schools have different approaches to it. So again, it's a very school specific thing.
So we've just put in, I think there's a common thing, where do you get past papers from? These are free websites. Just to bear in mind that I think most of them don't have answers. A lot of the sites you have to pay for answers. These are just some where you can get papers from. Always look at the school, and I think as Jemma said, look at other schools and grab their papers as well. My personal approach when I did with my sons was that we would grab papers and then we'd go through it with a tutor. And I tried the companies where you buy sample answers, and I felt for English that approach didn't really work, because English is so varied. What someone writes, it might not be wrong when you compare it to a standard answer. So for me personally, that didn't work. For maths, that did work. And as parents, we were more mathematical and science-based, so we'd pay for the answers and then we'd have a look at our son's paper. I felt that approach wasn't good for English, but again, that's very personal. Interviews, right? This is my big forte. So I'm an interviewer for university, so I've been trained to teach interview and interview techniques, and that interest of mine has spilled over to 11 plus, so I help with 11 plus interviews. Okay, should we get the next slide?
Yep.
Right, why do schools interview? Again, it's very different from grammar schools. Grammar schools don't interview their child. With independent schools, they're looking at the whole package. So why do these schools interview? Well, they want to know a couple of things on the interview. They want to know if you are going to be a good fit for them. Are you going to represent them in sports, in music? Are you going to show off for them? What are you going to give the school when you come here? So they're looking for an ambassador role. Will you meet the demands of the school? Now, one of the things that they ask in the interview is your hobbies and interests. And the reason they ask this is they want to know, can you juggle lots of things at once? Are you good at your academics? And can you do your sports and your music or whatever it is? So they want to see things like resilience, all the extracurricular stuff. It teaches you a lot of things that doing papers can't. Communication, teamwork, leadership, all these things will get out in the interview. So if you have a broad range of extracurricular hobbies, that's excellent, okay? In some cases, it's just as important as doing well in the written, okay? So will you be able to come to the school, meet the academic challenges, as well as be an active participant in school life? And will the school suit you? I've known very capable children who have not got offers because for some reason the school has decided they are not the right fit. And I always say to them, don't take that as a rejection. You and the school is like a jigsaw. There has to be a fit and there has to be a match. You might not be good for that school. And this is something that they would tease out in the interview. Are you going to be good at this school? Is this school going to give you everything that you need? Is it going to bring out the best in you? So the purpose of the interviews is really a couple of things, and those are the ones. Should we go to the next one?
Yep.
Typical questions. Okay, this varies again from interview to interview. So if you know past parents who've gone through the process, ask them what came up. And they do tend to stick to the same format. Hobbies, that will come up generally in every interview. So when parents say, should I prepare for interview? Absolutely, you have to prepare, okay? You can't just turn up and start speaking. So have a preparation, talk about your hobbies and interests, practice with a family, practice with a friend. People say, do I need an interview coach like myself? Do I need to go through a mock interview? I think for the whole 11 plus, the answer is you don't need anything. You can do it yourself. But some parents feel they need help, and which is where someone like myself or Gemma would come into it. So they can ask these questions, but they're not sure how their child should answer them. So that's where we would give some guidance. Books, what books have you read? I always say have 2 books on the go that you can talk about, books that you finish and you're able to discuss. It doesn't need to be a hard classic. We just want to know that you're passionate and enthusiastic about the book, okay? So don't feel it needs to be Shakespeare. Someone can passionately talk about David Walliams, can talk about literary techniques. How was the central character? How do you think the ending should have, been changed? And that can lead to a really fruitful discussion. Okay, so don't feel that it needs to be something that's an amazing book. Occasionally you get ethical questions, not so much so, but it could be something like, is it right for footballers to get involved in politics? For example, the Marcus Rashford thing, that links into current affairs. I always think it's good for your own child to be knowledgeable about current affairs. So something like This Week magazine or First News, that broadens their horizons, not just for the 11 plus purpose. So make sure that they're in touch with current affairs. It shows that you're well read. It shows a lot about a child. So do that. And that can come up in the interview. Last year, it came up as a group discussion, the Australian bushfires. So if you didn't know what was going on, that would be very difficult. Occasionally, some schools will put academic questions. Habs did this a lot this year. There was a maths and an English.
This year especially got done, but that was a COVID specific. But I do know schools do it normally as well.
Yeah, exactly. I think because of COVID, we saw a lot of that. Typically, the English would be a poem and they'll ask questions. The maths might be some sort of challenging problem. They'll ask you to solve it. So again, do your research. Try and find out from your school or past parents, what's the typical format of the interview for that school. This one comes up a lot. Why are you going to choose this school? Why do you want to come to this school? And I really cringe when people say, oh, because of the reputation, the academic league tables. Make it personal, make it specific. Show me, the interviewer, why you want to come to this school, not why anyone wants to come to this school, why you want to come to this school. What specifically about this school and not this school down the road interests you? And again, that's going to be part of your research, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. You're going to show off. You need to set yourself apart from the person who is next to you, who's applying to you. How are you going to do that? You're going to talk about your achievements. And I think I'm going to talk about it a little bit more in the next slide. Pictures. We saw that this year. Jags, girls set a picture, and that was a starting point for a discussion. So they might show pictures. Objects, that's come up. We've had a skull before. We've had an orange before. And again, in the interview course that I run, I'll go through how to answer those. Jemma, do you want to add anything on? No? Okay.
I think someone's asked, is Harry Potter an accepted book interest? Yes, definitely. How do you get children to know current affairs? Talks around the dinner table. That's my advice. Discuss it. Make sure they've got something like the Week Junior and ask them to tell you about the things they find interesting. That would be my...
Definitely. I don't think I would add to that. Absolutely. So you're going to sell yourself. That's the purpose of your point in the interview, is to, why should they give you an offer and not your friend? And you can do that through your hobbies. You're going to show how varied they are, how you can balance various things. Hobbies are also important in terms of mental health and well-being. It's an outlet. So it's really healthy when we see someone who's got a range of hobbies. It means they can cope. When they are under a lot of pressure on GCSEs and A-levels, they can kick a ball and do football, or they can go swimming or play hockey. So it's a good thing. Achievements. So the achievements, what I want you to do is think of all the achievements you've done in the last couple of years. We don't want to know about what happened in year 1 or what happened in nursery that you got star of the week. That's not the achievements that we're going for. Anything in the last 2 years, write it down. And people forget, if you haven't done the prep, people forget to bring these things up. So, do a log, do a list.
Yeah, I once had a student who forgot he was in the school ski team because it was summer. He spent the whole time talking about his achievements in tennis, which were nowhere near the ones in skiing, just because it was the wrong season.
Oh dear, what a waste. And schools love that, hearing that kind of thing, you know. So these are the kind of achievements I want you to write a log. Any badges that you've got, monitor, school council, any certificates, remember, in or out of school. Trophies you've done, any prizes you've got. And this is why I love that there's an online interview. You can see the, don't know if you can see my back, but I've told my students, put your trophies on the back. It can be a talking point on the online interview. Use that space. The fact that it's online is actually to your advantage. There are lots of hacks and tips that we can give you. So make sure you show these off. Start banging the certificate and putting it on the wall. You know, it's your interview, your space. You can do whatever you want with it. So keep a log. Say everything from year 4, 5, 6. Keep a log of everything.
And if you're looking now for the years, start that log now so that you've remembered it all, and then you can always recap it.
So I do university entrance interviews, and I do exactly the same thing. You won't believe this skill about logging, doing all your achievements. I say the exact same thing to my sixth formers. Right, this question comes up. What school are you going? Why do you want to come to this school? Why have you applied to this school? Now, as I said, make it specific, okay? Why do you want to come here? So you're going to get your information from various factors. Do the open day, okay? In COVID, it's very difficult. Go on the virtual tour, speak to previous parents, look at the prospectus, and look at the school magazine. It'll show you the various clubs and what kind of things that they're interested in. And then choose something. So, for example, my son, he did the virtual tour and he listened to the headmaster's speech. And he really liked the fact that the headmaster said, you can just be you when you come here. You don't have to be anyone else. Something so simple that resonated with him. And he brought that up in his answer. Can you see how much more interesting and specific that is to someone who just says, well, it's got a great reputation, it's #1 on the league table, okay? It shows they've done their research. This is what matters to them, that they can be them because they think their selves is great. They would love to be themselves and go to a school where that's going to push them but still retain their character, okay? So when you're answering these questions, use all these various information and pick out specific things that are important to you and not your parent, important to you. Right, red flags, I think we're getting towards the end. The red flags are not saying that the school you're applying to is your first choice. You will be absolutely surprised how many children say this. And in Hab's interview this year, what they did is they said, no, don't worry about what your parents say. You know, tell us the truth. They really did push them on this question. And some children crumbled. They said, okay, I only want to come 60%. You know, absolutely say that that's your first choice school. Don't look bored. So it's not what comes out of your mouth, it's the way that comes out of it. So, for example, if I was to say two sentences, the same sentence, but I said them in a different way, I'll show you what I mean. So if I said, oh, Gemma's going to do a Facebook Live today. Oh, Jemma's going to do a Facebook Live today, right? The way I've said it is completely different. I've said the same thing, but we call this non-verbal communication. Things like the tone of your voice. You can tell the enthusiasm and passion I had in the second one, when the first one I looked quite bored and I looked quite down. So the way you say it matters. And it's exactly the same tool I give my sixth formers. I talk about paralanguage, tone, non-verbal communications, eye contact. It's not so much what you say, it's the way you say it, okay? So that's really important. Again, that's where practice pays off. Don't look bored. If you've got an online interview, set up an online interview with your mum and ask questions online. Even though it's online, you can tell a little bit about my personality from this talk. You can tell I'm engaged, you can tell what I like. So even on an online interview, we can get to know the person. Don't fib, okay? Every question, every answer that you give in an interview can be a follow-up question. And through the follow-up question, we can tell if you're fibbing or lying. And it really doesn't create a good impression. So if you've said, yeah, I play the guitar, and then someone says, well, what riffs and chords do you play? And you have no idea, you're going to get caught out, okay? So don't fib. There are two types, one-word answers, which is one we don't like, where you just say yes or no. And then there's the other extreme, where someone is coming and they're really over-rehearsed. So they might say, oh, yes, this school was absolutely amazing. And someone said, I think the word they used was insurmountable. And I was like, that's not how you talk. So those are two extremes we don't want, you know, not being natural, not being normal. The schools want to know you. So do yourself justice, do them justice. Some prep is good. You don't need to over prep by rehearsing lines. That's one thing I'd say to my clients. Don't rehearse lines, okay? Rehearse themes. So in your mind, you might say, okay, hobbies, I've got sport, music, and art. I'm just going to keep those themes in my mind. I don't want you to rehearse lines and lines and lines. And I see parents do this to their children. And again, that's why someone who knows interviews is going to help you decipher what you can and cannot say. So think about themes. Don't rote learn any of these answers. Do you know, Jemma, you want to add to
that? No. What I would have to say is, unfortunately, I've got to go because we've talked for an hour. But
yeah, we can keep talking.
That's all right. So what I might do, I might just, if I can remove myself, then I think you can keep going. And I'm going to say goodbye to everybody.
Yeah.
Thanks ever so much for watching. I am going to disappear, but I think you should be able to keep going. I think so. I'm just going to remove myself, and I'll be back in a bit. Bye bye.
Bye. Right, it's going to be tricky for me to answer all the questions and keep talking. So what I will try and do is later on, we will go through the questions and we'll try and answer it in the chat. That was just mainly the overview of the independent schools and the interviews. Jemma is not here, but she runs a tutoring company called the Education Hotel. So do look that up. We'll try and leave some details in the chat as well. I have a book on Amazon. So it's called Independent Interview Success, and it will give you tips, things that you can do from now to prepare the interview. Interview prep really doesn't need to be more than a couple of weeks before the actual interview. Really hardcore prep, okay? Well, there is Gemma's details, so let's have a look through that. And that's my book, and that's my one-to-one sessions. Okay, I think she's just going through the slides. Okay, so formal interview prep doesn't need to be till a couple of weeks before the actual interview. And I've had a lot of questions about when you can book sessions. Don't worry about that. Do that later towards the autumn term, well, winter term, I would say. However, there are things you can do now, like current affairs, hobbies and interests, making that log, and those tips will be in my book. Things you can do now. At the moment, focus on the written. The written preparation is key. So keep the interview stuff to the back burner, and it should be light and informal. I do one-to-one mock interview sessions. My details are on there. I'm very open about my charges. The rates are on the flyer. Typically, you need one session. I very, very rarely do I not get results. You know, and some people, they just enjoy the session, so they want another one, even though I say you don't need one. But one session is usually all it takes, so feel free to book that in. Do have a look at Jemma. She's very experienced. I'm more of a specialist, so interviews is my forte and more independent schools. But Jemma is the real person with the knowledge about all the schools all over the country. So do contact her. She's very good at giving advice, and she has an overview of the whole picture. Also, she can tell you more questions about the grammar and the independent schools. Right, I think I'm going to wrap this up. I'm going to try and answer the questions in the chat. Thank you for coming. We really do appreciate it. The fact that you're here shows us that you're interested in your child's future. Really wish you all the best. Thank you to the Facebook group as well for having us both. We really enjoyed it. Again, you know, watch out for us, email us. Don't worry about any questions being too silly or stupid. I have been there as a parent, and it's been a very steep learning curve trying to find out all the answers. So I'm going to go and say goodbye. I'll pick up the comments as well. And thank you.